You're watching BBC News at 9 with me, Carrie, Gracie. Our headlines. Markets fall sharply again after moves by central banks across the world to join forces to try to limit the impact of the new coronavirus. From today, the UK government holds daily televised briefings to update the public on the fight against the virus. New York City and Los Angeles shut down bars, restaurants and other public places. We'll be live in Italy, where there's already lockdown, and in France, where the government is warning the situation is deteriorating very fast. At 9:15, we'll speak to the national coordinator of the Mutual Aid Network, who says the response to people panic buying should be to protect each other and check in on the vulnerable. And in sport, bosses of both rugby codes as well as horse racing meet today to discuss how their sports tackle the outbreak. Good morning, welcome to BBC News at 9. Markets around the world have fallen again this morning. It comes after moves by central banks to join forces to try to limit the economic impact of the new coronavirus. The US central bank slashed the cost of borrowing to effectively zero, cutting its main interest rate to a range of 0 to 0.25%. Here, Downing Street is stepping up efforts to keep the public informed about its plans to tackle the virus and how to protect themselves. From today, the Prime Minister or a senior minister will hold daily news briefings. Boris Johnson will also convene another emergency COBRA meeting and take part in a video conference call with other G7 leaders to discuss a coordinated global response. The Education Secretary, Gavin Williamson, is meeting head teachers leaders to discuss their concerns. A number of schools have already taken the decision to close. And in Scotland, official advice to cancel all large gatherings of more than 500 people comes into force today. Most of the 35 coronavirus-related deaths in the UK have so far been people aged over 60 with underlying health conditions. Simon Jones has more.
This is something we're now going to be seeing on a daily basis. The Prime Minister and senior ministers, supported by scientific and medical experts, holding briefings, following criticism that there's been a lack of transparency over plans to stem the spread of the virus. Many people admit they're anxious, particularly after the government said that in the coming weeks, everyone over the age of 70 could be told to stay at home, potentially for a period of months.
It's just scary, and straight away it scares my husband, because he's in that age bracket.
I don't fancy being locked away for a few weeks.
Ahead of today's news conference, there'll be a meeting here at the Cabinet Office of the government's Emergency COBRA Committee. That will look at the next steps in shielding the vulnerable and elderly from the virus and consider whether mass gatherings should be banned. There'll also be a phone call involving the leaders of the G7 nations, in which Boris Johnson will urge them to put more money and expertise into speeding up the development of a vaccine. Among those to have lost their lives is retired police officer Nick Matthews, who was 59. He had previously suffered a heart attack. His wife described him as her soulmate. And Jez Martinez's 78-year-old grandfather died at Wickham Hospital in Buckinghamshire. She says he had tested positive for coronavirus.
It was very shocking. Obviously, we are grieving. There's been a lot going on, as obviously now the testing has been stopped, so now the worry is for the rest of my family and everybody else that may go through this.
To ease demand on the emergency services, the Scottish Government says gatherings of more than 500 people should be cancelled from today. And head teachers, feeling the pressure too, will meet the Education Secretary to discuss their concerns. British holidaymakers have been facing a battle to get home after countries like Spain went into lockdown. This was a scene at the airport in Tenerife. And in the US, the race is on to get out before transatlantic flights are grounded.
The stress levels have changed. Been feeling very, very anxious and just really wanting just to have the security of getting on that plane and taking off.
The sense of uncertainty has meant panic buying in the shops is continuing. It's clear that daily life will not be normal for some time to come. Simon Jones, BBC News.
Well, as we mentioned a moment ago, markets falling again this morning after central banks around the world took coordinated action to try to limit the economic impact of the pandemic. The Federal Reserve in the United States cut interest rates to 0.25%. President Trump praised that move, but markets, well, are they impressed? Let's talk to business presenter Dominic O'Connell here with us now. Dom, from the market reaction, not convinced?
No, not at all. The FTSE 100, the London stock market's main index, has opened down just over 7% this morning. It's only been open for just over an hour. It's a big fall. To put that in context, last week we had the second biggest fall in history. That was nearly 11%. So we're getting, we're edging up there. It's a big fall. Particularly, it comes after some pretty extraordinary stuff from central banks. The Federal Reserve did an emergency rate cut on a Sunday night. It's the first time in the history of the Federal Reserve there have been two emergency rate cuts in a row. They did one on March the 3rd. They did one again last night. And other central banks around the world also stepped in to shore up the supply of dollars. Now, what that means, sounds a bit of an odd thing to say, who needs more dollars? It's because they're worried about individual companies not having access to credit, not being able to get hold of the dollars they need to refinance their debt and going bust. So they're trying to shore up credit markets as well as stock markets. But on the evidence of what's happened in London this morning, certainly the share markets have taken this rather badly and are sharply down.
And of course, for many of our viewers, that is going to go straight through to jobs.
Well, it will, and in the next couple of weeks, there's a lot of companies in the hospitality sector, restaurants, airlines, all the ones that are obviously affected by the coronavirus are going to be going bust. And SAS, the Scandinavian airline, last night said it was going to lay off 90% of its workforce for the foreseeable future. Now, that is probably something like that, possibly not quite as dramatic, is going to happen here in the UK. IAG, which is the owner of British Airways, said it's going to cancel 75% of its flights, 75% of its flying schedule in April and May. EasyJet said that because of the rolling program of cancellations, that's likely to lead eventually to its grounding. It said the majority of its fleet. TUI, the biggest holiday company, has said that it's going to cease the vast majority, were the words it used, of all its holiday operations. So that's cruises, package holidays, flights, hotels, until further notice. That is a giant freeze on the hospitality and travel sector.
And obviously it's a giant freeze because of all the social distancing, because of countries closing their borders. There is nowhere to fly. There's nowhere to go out and eat.
There's nowhere to fly. And also tomorrow we should remember that US ban on flights from continental Europe, or certain passengers from continental Europe, extends to the UK from tomorrow, early in the morning tomorrow. So that's for airlines like British Airways, and particularly Virgin Atlantic, which is heavily exposed to the North Atlantic. There's just nowhere left to fly, really.
And I was listening to your radio slot on the Today programme just after 6 this morning, and you had the boss of the Confederation of British Industry on, and she said we need something from the government which is huge, fast, and I can't remember what her third adjective was.
Well, immediately available. In the budget, we had a £1 billion fund promised for businesses that are in problem with the coronavirus, and that would be administered by a thing called the British Business Bank, which is administered by the Department for Trade and Industry. The question is it actually up and running, and has it dispensed any money? And what Carolyn Fairbairn, the Director General of the CBI, was talking about is essentially helicopter money, just throwing money at businesses who basically will go under in the next few weeks because they have no demand. They have no cash coming in, and the outlook for them is very grim. How do you get money to them really quickly? That is the issue for the government.
And going back to the state side, the Fed cut, I mean, it makes the point, I suppose, when you bring your interest rate down 0 to 0.25, you've got nowhere left to go. You've got no further ammunition.
You could do what the European Central Bank has done and go negative, which sounds like a hard thing to get your head around, a negative interest rate. The idea is that...
So to pay people to borrow money?
Yes. So banks, it's a way of stimulating commercial banks to lend more, because if the bank leaves its money overnight on deposit with the central bank, they have to pay money for the privilege of doing so. So the idea is it pushes banks to lend more and more money to the real economy. The evidence of negative interest rates is not great. It's not entirely clear that they do much to stimulate the real world economy. I think it's unlikely the Bank of England will go there. In his last press conference, he leaves office in a few hours' time. Mark Carney said that conventional monetary policy in the UK did not include negative interest rates, but he did say conventional.
And I suppose the point of all of this is to say, actually, it exposes the limits of central bank or government monetary policy, where when you say we've got a demand shock like the one we're talking about, there's like not a lot they can do.
Exactly. And in his press conference last night, which actually a lot of people won't have listened to the whole thing because it was quite late at night, Jay Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, said, look, what we're doing here is we understand that cutting interest rates will not make people go on a plane to fly or cancel a concert or an event. But he said what we want to do is set the conditions so that when the coronavirus passes, the economy can recover as quickly as possible. So really, in cutting interest rates, he's looking past the coronavirus, the immediate crisis at hand, and trying to look to a rapid recovery after the virus has passed.
Dominic, thank you. Well, let's now look at what the government is doing here. It's to hold the first of its daily news briefings later. So let's get more on that from our assistant political editor, Norman Smith, in Westminster. And Norman, they're about to try to get back on top and ahead of the story.
They are, because there's been a series of, if you like, missteps in terms of government communication, which have perhaps jolted public confidence a bit. We obviously had the sort of seeming rethink over whether to press ahead with a ban on large public events after we were told it wasn't going to happen. We then had that seeming disagreement or different messages anyway from the chief scientific officer on Friday, talking about this idea of herd immunity, getting a large part of the population to build up some sort of immunity to coronavirus, only to be sort of contradicted by the health secretary on Sunday, who said, no, that is not our goal. So I think there is a desire to just try and provide a clearer, more coherent message, but also to be more open, transparent, also a sense that this is changing day by day, maybe even hour by hour, and therefore there is a need for these daily updates, because every 24 hours the government is almost having to fine-tune its response. And I think there's a sense that because we are now in an age of social media, there is so much information, rumour, fear, if you like, out there. The government cannot afford to adopt, if you like, a slightly more laid-back approach. It has to be engaging on a daily basis. And I think, too, because there is genuine nervousness that we are pursuing what seems to be a different strategy to many other countries, albeit listening to the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, this morning, the view in government seems very much to continue with that strategy, because that is the advice they're getting from the Chief Medical Advisor and the Chief Scientific Advisor. Have a listen to Mr. Shapps.
We are absolutely, religiously, if you like, following the advice of medical and scientific officers. So we think the best way to handle this is not to do what sort of politicians think is the right thing to do, but to do what the experts, the scientists, the medical experts tell us needs to be done. So that's the first thing, and that's, I suppose, been the hallmark of the way that the British government's been handling this. The second thing I'd say is other countries are just in a different position with this. Italy, France and Germany may just be a week or two ahead in terms of the infection rate.
Grant Shapps said, so Norman, how do we expect the government to react later today in response, I suppose, to the growing pressure to publish the data? I mean, we're hearing a kind of chorus from worried epidemiologists and virologists, and indeed from the Labour Party, saying, publish the data, reassure us.
I don't think there's any problem about publishing the data. I suspect it's purely putting it in a manner which can be presented coherently, because data is coming from all different parts of the world, medical experts all over the place who, I don't know whether they have copyright over the data or whatever. I think it is merely a sort of logistical issue. I don't think there's a problem per se. Indeed, the sort of view in government is that they welcome debate, criticism, because we're dealing with something which we've never dealt with before. I think also what they're quite determined to try and do is to give people a sense of ownership of this crisis. By that I mean to make people aware that this is not something which government is going to step in and resolve. We are going to have to play a huge part as individuals in terms, obviously, of self-isolating, but also in terms of community response. There is a view that, you cannot expect, for example, the care sector to provide all the necessary support and help for the elderly, we as individuals are going to have to step up. And we've already seen that in local communities with people setting up sort of street food deliveries, putting messages through older folks' doors saying, you know, is there anything you need, trying to arrange daily visits. And we are going to have to do that. So part of the point of these daily news conferences is to build up a sense almost of national endeavour that we're all in this together, and not just to sort of assume that somehow this is something government can fix.
And turning from the public health angle to the economic angle, we've been talking about the markets suffering more falls this morning, Norman, and the CBI saying we need something coordinated, we need something huge, we need something fast, or many businesses will go under. And with that, obviously, jobs and livelihoods across some really very vulnerable and economically at-risk individuals.
Yeah, I've not heard so much government action or focus on the economic side. I mean, since the budget, when we obviously had that package from Rishi Sunak. But we know the Transport Secretary is in conversations with the airline industry, who of course are in, you know, desperate straits. Likewise with the rail operators, who've also seen, I think last week they saw a 20% fall in travellers. But I think there is a growing view that the package unveiled by the Chancellor last week, no way is that going to be enough. There's going to have to be much more radical intervention, added to which I think there is a growing nervousness about the poorer members of the community. We heard from Louise Casey this morning about the predicament facing particularly people who rely on food banks because of panic buying, that there was no longer sort of pasta and tins of vegetables, etc. People just weren't putting those in food banks anymore. So I think there is going to have to be some thought then. But I come back to this point about trying to engender a national spirit, because I think part of the answer to the panic buying phenomenon is peer pressure, the hope that people will say, in effect, to neighbours, for goodness sake, pull yourself together. You know, there's plenty of food and you are depriving actually vulnerable people of food. So just get your act together, and to hope that that puts the brakes on things, rather than the government sort of issuing stern words telling people not to do this, that simple community peer pressure might be a more effective way of stopping panic buying.
Norman, thanks so much for that from Westminster. We'll talk to you again later. And just another line from the world of politics. Labour MP Kate Osborne, breaking news from her. She was diagnosed with COVID-19 following a period of self-isolation and subsequent testing. She went on to say that she would encourage everyone to band together and support the most vulnerable in our communities. So that is a second MP. Obviously, we already had Nadine Dorries, who was in self-isolation after being diagnosed with coronavirus. And there's another Cabinet Minister, Anne-Marie Trevelyan, tested negative, but is staying at home for 7 days as a precaution. Lots more on that coming up. Let's take a little look at our headlines again. Markets have fallen sharply again after moves by central banks across the world to join forces to try to limit the impact of coronavirus. From today, the UK government's holding daily briefings to update the public on the fight against the virus. New York City and Los Angeles shut down bars, restaurants and other public places in an effort to halt the spread of the virus.
In sport, England's Rugby Premiership is set to announce a postponement to the league season. Clubs will discuss the potential 4-week suspension of play. However, some teams believe a longer break is necessary. Super League clubs will meet, and also the Rugby Football League, about their season. Horse racing in Britain set to go on, though, behind closed doors until the end of the month. The British Horse Racing Authority are yet to announce whether April's Grand National will go ahead. The Italian Football Federation wants Euro 2020 to be postponed so their top flight league can finish. The first game of the tournament is due to be played on June the 12th. UEFA holding a meeting tomorrow to discuss what happens next. More sport in about 20 minutes. I'll see you then.
Let's take a global look now at virus development. A growing number of countries are taking steps to limit social activity and the movement of people across their borders. America's two biggest cities, New York and Los Angeles, are shutting down all entertainment venues and placing restrictions on restaurants and bars. Germany is introducing strict border controls from today. Efforts to repatriate 30,000 British tourists from ski resorts in France are underway. Lebanon has announced a 2-week lockdown, and Qatar's joined other Gulf countries in barring entry to foreign air passengers. At least 26 countries in Africa have now reported cases, prompting many to announce measures to control the spread of the disease. Kenya is blocking entry to all non-nationals without a resident permit. South Africa has declared a state of disaster. It's closing borders and schools. Rich Preston now reports.
Across Europe, the lives of millions of people have come to a standstill, their movements restricted, everyday activities halted, as successive governments try to contain the virus. Spain is coming to terms with a dramatic jump in the number of fatalities, an additional 97 over the weekend, bringing the total to over 280. Hospitals are at capacity. Those deemed not ill enough are sent home. The Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez, has declared a 2-week state of emergency. People are told to stay at home unless leaving to go to work or to buy essential supplies. Museums, cultural centres and sports centres are closed. Similar measures have been introduced in France. Cinemas, nightclubs and anything described as non-essential are shut. Bistros and brasseries have been forced closed. These cornerstones of the French social and cultural scene lying empty, their doors locked. Italy remains the worst-hit country in Europe, with a death toll of over 1,800 people. It's had a national lockdown in place for over a week now, but still the number of infections and fatalities keeps rising. European Union members have been told the best way to get through the crisis is to pool resources and to work together to start making essential medical supplies and life-saving equipment. And Germany, Europe's largest economy, is closing itself off from the outside world, sealing its borders. People without good reason will not be allowed to enter the country. Commuters and goods vehicles will be exempt. Germany's had more than 4,800 confirmed cases and has had 12 deaths. Whilst some in the early days criticised quarantines and limits on movement as knee-jerk overreactions by their governments, many now say the measures are too little, too late. Rich Preston, BBC News.
Well, let's get the latest on the situation in Italy now, still the worst affected country in Europe. Our correspondent Sima Katecha in Rome for us. Sima, it's a grim situation as the numbers of infections, the numbers of deaths rises dramatically by the day. What is the latest?
It's really heartbreaking. 368 people died in the last 24 hours from coronavirus, almost 25,000 cases across the country, most of those in the north. The hospitals, they're really struggling. Doctors say they're at the end of their tether. Some hospitals are running out of intensive care beds. They don't have ventilators. They're saying if they don't get that essential kit, people will be even more vulnerable. And there's also concern that the outbreak could spread to the south of the country because people have been moving, thousands of people have been moving from the north to the south in recent weeks, and hospitals in the south, a poorer part of the country, are not as well equipped. Now the Prime Minister is saying his priority is to make sure doctors and nurses are safe and protected from the virus so that they can carry out essential care. Now we're expecting an announcement imminently about a decree that's going to be put in force. The Prime Minister expected to boost the economy by putting in about 25 billion euros. Lots of people not going to work at the moment, so there's also reports that he might be not asking for mortgage payments for the next 14 months or so. So we're waiting for that news at the moment.
And what is happening, Sima, in terms of assistance to France from around Europe? Because we've heard the new European Commission president saying we all have to stick together, we all have to share, we all have to help each other. Obviously, Italy is currently the front line. Is it getting the support it needs from its neighbours?
Well, Italy is the barometer, isn't it? It's the test. It's to see what's happening here. At the moment, Prime Minister Conte's approval ratings are high. People think that what he is doing is necessary. Most people think that. They think that these measures are absolutely essential. And yes, you're right, the world is watching to see what happens here and whether countries need to follow suit. But watching what's happening in Spain at the moment, they're doing very similar things. Similar measures have been put in force. The Prime Minister says that over the next couple of weeks he will be assessing the situation and then he will make a judgment about whether these measures stay in place till April. At the moment they're supposed to be in place till the end of the month.
Seema, thank you very much for that from Rome. Let's now go on to France, where the head of the health service has described the outbreak as very worrying and the situation deteriorating. Hugh Schofield there for us. Hugh, what is the health service saying now?
Well, yeah, we had the chief medical officer, or the equivalent, saying that, as you yourself quoted him, that the situation is very alarming and deteriorating fast. Essentially, we're in a period of exponential growth, which is now becoming very, very obvious because the figures are getting very, very big. There are 5,000 confirmed cases, 127 dead, and it's doubling every 3 days. And that's the point, that it's just about to take off. And there's a real sense here in France that we're on the edge of a precipice. There has been a certain insouciance up till now, to use the French term, a certain lackadaisicalness about it, and the government is getting more and more worried that people aren't really getting the message. We have a load of new measures that come into force today, of course. That's the school closures, the bar and cafe closures, the shop closures, apart from food shops and pharmacies and so on. But there is a sense that things are only going to get worse. I mean, we really feel here in Paris that while life is kind of just about continuing as normal, but there are people on the streets and there is traffic on the streets, that something big is about to hit. The wave is about to crash down. And the word from hospitals is that they're beginning to really feel the strain. So I would not be at all surprised if in the next day or two we see measures announced here which are similar to the ones announced in Madrid and in Rome. In that sense, you can see a kind of chain reaction taking place across Europe as countries suddenly realise that the wave is about to hit them.
Hugh, thank you very much for that. Well, as the cases in the UK rise and supermarkets strive to keep up with demand, it seems community spirit is flourishing. Mutual aid groups have been springing up across the country, aimed at bringing together people who can help each other and those who need help, getting that help from their neighbours, people who are vulnerable, people who are self-isolating. So let's talk more about this now with Avia Day, who is the National Coordinator for the COVID-19 Mutual Aid Network. Tell us more about your network and what it's trying to do.
Well, yeah, I'm not the coordinator. However, I'm part of a group of people that are trying to set up mutual aid groups all over the country. There's 250 groups that have set up now, and there's groups setting up all the time. Obviously, we know that this is a global crisis, and we know that coronavirus doesn't really care who it hits, but the way in which the impact will be felt by people will be really different depending on who you are. So what we're trying to do with WhatsApp groups, with Facebook groups, is to try and self-organise support. So offering people support around picking up their prescriptions, getting their weekly shop, walking their dog, things like that really. And we know that people that are elderly, that are self-isolating at the moment, might not have people around to do that.
And so how do you communicate with them? Is this notes through the letterbox?
Yeah. So what we've been doing in London specifically, for example, is setting up a borough-wide Facebook group, going into WhatsApp groups based on wards, and then trying to coordinate into very small local subgroup areas, going to people's houses, putting leaflets through the door, putting posters up on lampposts or in particular areas like libraries, things like that, just to get the word out that we're here, we want to help you, you're not alone. If there's anything you need, please get in contact with us and we'll come and help you.
And are people taking you up on that? Because I suppose one of the things that in my mind is there'll be some people who either don't see those, and there'll be other people who maybe don't trust those, who don't feel secure about reaching out to a stranger.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And we've tried to reassure people, look, we don't want anything from you. We don't want money. We're just concerned that if you're alone, that you know, we don't want you going through this by yourself. Yeah, I mean, we only set up, you know, about 3 days ago now. And yeah, we're definitely getting a lot of people coming in. Even just people who, you know, are outside of London or outside of that area who want someone to go and check on their elderly mum or their elderly dad, which we've been able to do, or just give them a phone call in case they're lonely or in case they need anything. So yeah, we're getting a lot of requests coming through and a lot of really great examples of mutual aid. Yeah,
that's great. And so if viewers want to either help or if they are the individuals who need the help, how should they get in touch?
You can get in touch with the Mutual Aid UK Twitter account. You can set up your own mutual aid group if you don't think you've got one in your area. Just setting up a Facebook group, inviting some local people really seems to get the ball rolling. You know, Hackney started 2-3 days ago. We've got 2,500 people involved already. So yeah, I think everyone get involved, do what you can.
And that in itself, I'm just thinking as you're saying that, is a very nice kind of counterbalance to the kind of stories of supermarket panic buying and kind of individual kind of looking after themselves. The fact that you've got thousands of people who are already saying, I want to help somebody else is
it's
nice,
absolutely
isn't it?
amazing. I started, you know, a Facebook group on Thursday and a few days later thousands of people were volunteering. I didn't think anyone would want to come forward or want to help. I understand why people are panic buying. You know, I went to the shop the other day and things were flying off the shelves, and I was like, oh my goodness. You know, people haven't got a lot of information and they're worried and they don't, you know, they're seeing other countries all around Europe going into lockdown. People don't really know what lockdown means and there's no information about what that's going to look like and how they need to prepare. So I understand why people are doing that. But yeah, you're right. The other side of it is, you know, we're trying to look out for each other. And if we do look out for each other, we can get through this. You know, in Hackney, people have just gone round and donated a few tins to the Hackney Food Bank, for instance. So if everyone, gives 4 or 5 tins, then, you know, that's replenished and we can support the people who are most vulnerable in our community.
Well, thanks for getting the message out here,
Thank you very much for having me.
Well done for doing the network and keep it up, and all of us should join. Now, just a reminder that for all latest developments on the coronavirus outbreak, including what symptoms you should be looking out for, how to reduce your risk, how to help others, do visit the website bbc.co.uk/news or go to our BBC News app. Now, in a moment, the weather first, though let's hear from Victoria what she's got coming up in her programme in half an hour.
Good morning. The government says the fight against coronavirus will be a long haul and that the nation needs to come together. We know many of you have many questions, and today we're going to answer some of them with leading medical experts. Do get in touch using the hashtag #VictoriaLive or send us an email, victoria@bbc.co.uk. We'll also talk about how realistic and effective it might be to ask all over 70s to self-isolate in the coming weeks. Plus, should schools be closed, as they have done in many other parts of Europe? Join us live at 10 on BBC Two, the BBC News channel and online.
Thanks, Victoria. Now let's look at the weather. Here's Carol.
Thanks, Carrie. Good morning, everyone. If you haven't yet ventured outside, it is a chilly start to the day. Temperatures last night fell to -7.6 in Aboyne. High pressure has given us a fine and a dry start, but through the course of the day, we've got weather fronts coming in from the Atlantic. They're going to introduce thicker clouds, some rain and strengthening winds. We also have a little bit of cloud moving across eastern parts of England. That will thin and break. Then for England and for Wales, you're looking at a dry day, a sunny day, albeit hazy in the afternoon. Whereas for Northern Ireland and Scotland, increasingly from the west, turning cloudy, then wet, then windy. Temperatures 6 in the north to 13 in the south. Now, through this evening and overnight, this band of rain will continue to sink southwards, weakening all the time, taking its cloud with it, not getting into the far southeast by the end of the night. So as a result, for most of us, it isn't going to be as cold a night as the one just gone. Still, we'll have some showers across Scotland and in the mountaintops. They will still be wintry. Tomorrow, cloudier than today, we'll have rain moving across Northern Ireland, Scotland and Northern England.
Get the latest news and catch up on the day's big stories without lifting a finger. Say "Give me BBC News" to any smart speaker.
Hello, this is BBC News with Carrie, Gracie. Our headlines. Global stock markets have fallen again sharply after moves by central banks across the world to join forces to try to limit the impact of the new coronavirus. From today, the UK government is holding daily briefings to update the public on the fight against the virus. The first briefing will take place this afternoon. New York City and Los Angeles shut down bars, restaurants and other public places in an effort to halt the spread of the virus. And restrictions continue to tighten across Europe with more border closures. The head of France's health service has warned the situation there is deteriorating very fast. Time now for our morning briefing, where we try to bring you up to speed with stories that you are watching, reading and sharing. The virus, of course, dominating social media with people sharing their personal stories and their concerns on Twitter and other media. Many are using that platform to encourage others to stay positive. So nowhere more so than in Italy. Concert halls and opera houses may be closed, but you can still hear the music on the streets there. The Italian tenor Maurizio Macina took to his balcony in Florence to sing the classic Nessun Dorma. And apparently he's not alone. Many people have been doing the same, using music to connect with the outside world, to show support as well for their neighbours. As we've been hearing, millions of people in Spain have also been confined to their homes. Some there have found innovative ways to stay fit and help others. This fitness trainer was filmed leading a workout from the roof of a building in Seville, while residents joined in from surrounding apartments and balconies. In the US, the actor Arnold Schwarzenegger had his own message posting from his home in California. He advised anyone over 65 to stay indoors.
See, the important thing is that you stay at home, because there's a curfew now. Okay, no one is allowed out, especially someone that is like 72 years old. After you're 65, you're not allowed at the house anymore in California. So we stay home and we eat here, right? Oh yeah, that's yummy. I eat with the whiskey, and there's Lulu. Lulu loves carrots, whiskey loves carrots. I just had my little bit of vegan food. Oh, that was yummy, huh? Oh, see, that's what we do. We don't go out, we don't go to restaurants, we don't do anything like that anymore here. We just eat with whiskey and with Lulu. We have a good time, we get entertained. Look at that beautiful smile she has, huh? Oh, yes.
Arnie with whiskey and Lulu. Staying in the US, the lead singer of The Killers has been demonstrating his hand-washing technique, but rather than opt for Happy Birthday, Brandon Flowers chose a tune from his own back catalogue.
Jealousy, turning saints into the sea, swimming through sick lullabies, choking on your alibis, but it's just the price I pay. Destiny is calling me. Open up my eager eyes, 'cause I'm Mr. Brightside.
Brandon Flowers, and you may not be Brandon Flowers, but do send in your own singing hand washing songs. We're listening to all of them. UK social media also being used, of course, to encourage collective kindness. We were talking about that a moment ago with via this form. It's been shared widely on Twitter and Facebook. It's being used to offer help to vulnerable people who are self-isolating. You can print it out and you can put it through the letterbox of your neighbours. Thousands have been joining or donating to groups offering to lend a hand. Let me just also go through, as we normally do at this time in the morning, what's on the most read, most watched on the BBC News app. And you can see that most read list, all coronavirus stories, the number 10 briefing that we've been talking about, the stocks plunging despite the central bank efforts to stop them doing that. Airlines, well, Don was talking about that, huge cancellations now in flights all through the week across almost every destination. Your mental health, I think that's a really interesting one there, on how to make sure you stay sane and manage levels of anxiety. And then obviously some other stories. I just want to also mention the most watched. This is a really interesting little video on the you know, which really brings home visually the difference in Italy. This is Venice, and you know, we've just seen this reporter here. She's kind of like, she did a report on what it looked like with the crowds, and now she's doing all the same locations, empty, basically her and the sights of Venice as she walks around the city on her own, everybody else inside. And it's just a dramatic demonstration visually of the impact that the lockdown is having across Italy now, and as we know now, across many other European countries. I'll leave you to take a look at that on your own devices. But right now, that's the end of our morning briefing. We're going to take a look at all the sport fixtures now, and all the sports fixtures cancelled, I'm afraid. Here's Sally.
Yeah, we do have a couple of updates to bring you this morning, Carrie. We just heard in the last few minutes that the International Olympic Committee is holding talks with heads of international sports organisations tomorrow in response to the coronavirus outbreak. That is according to the Reuters news agency. There's less than 5 months until the start of the Games, due to start July the 24th. The IOC say the discussions are part of regular talks with stakeholders. Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and the Tokyo 2020 organisers have reiterated the Games will be going ahead as planned. Now, it's due to be a really big day today across several sports as they plan for their future amid the pandemic. England's Rugby Premiership is set to postpone their league season, plus European Cup competitions are also potentially set to be put on hold. Let's go right now to our Rugby Union correspondent, Chris Jones. Chris, how long could the Premiership be put on hold now?
Yes, there's a big meeting today over video link between all the Premiership clubs. I think 4 weeks, Sally, is going to be the bare minimum. We've seen in football with the Premier League, they've put the season on hold for 3 weeks, but no one realistically thinks that Premier League football is going to resume in 3 weeks. So even though the Premiership rugby might say 4 weeks to start off with, there is also a feeling among some clubs that a suspension of maybe 10 or even 12 weeks is going to be needed. But like with so many things around the coronavirus, there's very much a case of let's wait and see what unfolds over the coming weeks and months.
So, Exeter are top of the table and Saracens already set for relegation. Could Exeter simply be handed the title?
Well, that's a big debate, isn't it, across so many sports about what happens if the seasons don't ever resume. I know that has been floated around, that because Exeter do lead the table, they could be given the title with an asterisk. I would still think that would be unlikely. What I think is more realistic at this stage, and of course we just don't know how things are going to unfold across society over the next few months, but say rugby is able to resume in June or May, for example, then maybe all the cancelled games could be called 0-0 draws with a share of the points, and then the season could be resumed come May or June. But it's all very much up in the air. We'll get some more news after today, but there will also be an element of waiting to see how everything develops over the foreseeable future.
Chris, thanks very much indeed. That's Chris Jones reporting for us there. Big day too for Super League clubs who will meet the Rugby Football League about how the sport continues. It's after 4 Toronto Wolfpack players are now self-isolating after experiencing mild symptoms of coronavirus. Now, the British Horse Racing Authority is due to hold a meeting shortly as the sport prepares to close its doors to fans. Well, Britain's first meeting without crowds takes place at Kelso today. That's because of Scottish Government guidance banning gatherings of more than 500 people. And joining us live from there now is trainer Nick Alexander. Nick, it's going to be a really strange day of racing. What are you expecting?
Well, it's going to feel very odd. I mean, initially I was sort of slightly uncomfortable because it seemed a little absurd to be going ahead with racing. But on the other side of the coin is it's really, really important to keep any bits of the economy going that can be safely kept going. So, yeah, it's going to be odd, but I think we're doing the right thing so long as it's government recommends that it's been safe.
We've got a couple of weeks still to go, but what are your views on whether or not we will see the Grand National happen in April?
Again, it would be very sad if it was lost, but if it's safety-wise, that's the right thing to do. Then you know, it's one horse race. But I mean, it's a hugely valuable event for the local economy, for the economy of racing, and you know, if there's any way it can go ahead, then it would be wonderful if it could.
Nick, good luck today. I hope it all goes to plan. Thanks very much indeed. Now, UEFA meet tomorrow to decide what happens to all European competitions, including Euro 2020. The Italian Football Federation want the championships postponed. Rome hosts the first match of the tournament on June the 12th. They want time for their top flight to finish instead. Serie A is one of many leagues that's been suspended due to COVID-19, with Italy the worst affected by coronavirus in Europe. Let me bring you something a little bit distracting and more pleasant to talk about, because, of course, with many sports on hold, athletes have been having to find new ways to keep themselves occupied. Well, over in Melbourne, after Formula One's Australian Grand Prix was called off, six-time world champion Lewis Hamilton swapped the track for the surf. Look at that. And guess what? He's actually quite good. He's in Melbourne, enjoying the sunshine. Just as I said he was good, he fell off. Proves me wrong. I think he's good at everything, isn't he? That's just about it from me. That's all the sport for now. Carrie, back to you.
I don't think that proves you wrong. I think he really was quite good. I cannot believe that is the first time he's stood on a surfboard.
Done that before, I think.
You have to wonder. Thanks, Ali. Now, as we've been hearing, the government is to hold a briefing later, during which it's expected to update its advice on coronavirus, including measures on social distancing and self-isolation. Well, one woman who is currently self-isolating is Dr. Claire Garada. She's 60 years old. She's recovering at home from COVID-19, and she's been speaking about the realities of living with the illness to my colleagues Louise Minchin and Dan Walker.
I'm really getting much, much better. I still feel as if I've been through sort of 5 rounds with Mike Tyson, but each day I'm getting better, each day I'm getting stronger, and each day I can't believe that I've had it. So there you are.
And just tell us about how you felt, what were your first symptoms and how has it been?
Yes, thank you. Well, it's what it says on the tin, really. I'd come back from New York, where they quite clearly said they didn't have a problem at the beginning of the week I was there, and then declared a state of emergency towards the end. So I fairly knew that when I got a very high temperature, intense sore throat, headache and a dry cough, so exactly what you're told is going to happen happened. I really did know that it was coronavirus. And at the time, 111 was still routinely testing. So I had the test. I wasn't surprised that I'd had it. It lasts about 48, 72 hours in the real acute phase. And then you're left feeling as if you've sort of combination of a fight with a heavyweight boxer and a climb up Mount Everest. But the amazing thing, Louise, which I'd like to say, is how amazing one's body is, because my body, it's 60 years old, yet it's fought this virus. It's created its own defence. It's created antibodies. It's helped and protected my kidneys and my lungs and my heart. And now I'm coming through the other end. It is quite amazing. And I think we forget the power of our own body. It's not like a car which breaks down, has to go and be fixed, or thrown out. It repairs itself. The body repairs itself, and we get better. Now, clearly, I haven't got any underlying health conditions. I'm a relatively fit and well 60-year-old, so I've gone through this. It's uncomfortable, but I've got through it. Others with underlying health conditions or the elderly will probably need additional help. But the majority of us, our body will just deal with this. It's painful, but it's I've done it, and I'm not an extraordinary fit person.
Can you also tell us, because you've been really careful, haven't you, to try and not pass it on? You've been self-isolating, even from your husband. So how does that even work?
Well, it's very difficult. He hasn't got it, actually. I've asked him this morning, have you got any symptoms? So I suspect our self-isolation has truly worked. Well, we ring each other up on the mobile. He creates a distance from me if I appear, and vice versa. When I was really unwell in bed, he'd come wrapped in his Chelsea scarf and wearing gloves and keeping 2 meters away from me. If I used any utensils or cups, I put them in the dishwasher myself, so he didn't have to touch them. And then when I was well enough, I got up and cleaned the surfaces. So we've done it. I mean, we've kept a social distance. It's quite difficult. It'd be harder if we didn't have 2 separate bathrooms and 2 separate bedrooms. And I think people will have to think about how they do it. in many ways, please forgive me for saying this, Simon, I wish he had got it, because then we'd be in the same boat. Now we're not. You know, he hasn't had it and I have. So he's still got to be very careful and all sorts of things. But we've done it.
Yeah, and just so eventually you will be better. You will be able to go back to your work as a GP, and I suppose that puts you in, you know, from your patient's point of view, in a good position to help them.
Yes, isn't that wonderful? I've been looking at the literature of immunity. Now, common sense says that I will now have much more immunity than somebody who hasn't had it. I mean, there have been reported cases of people getting it twice, but it may be they're just being tested again for the same illness. So common sense would say that I've got immunity, and therefore I'll be able to help my colleagues, I'll be able to help my patients, I'll be able to do the bits that no one else wants to do or doesn't readily want to do, like, you know, home visits. People are still going to need face-to-face general practice care. You know, if you're pregnant, you're still going to have to put your hands on your abdomen. You can't do that remotely. If you've got a kid that's sick, it might not be corona. So I'm really looking forward to getting back. I know that sounds very odd at this stage, but I'm really looking forward. I'll try and get back to work next week in helping out with my colleagues, doing the face-to-face work, possibly helping out in the home visiting service, which inevitably will have to get going. And I'm there to help now.
And just really briefly, apart from getting back to work, what are you most looking forward to about getting out of self-isolation?
I'm looking forward to walking the dog in the park. Now, strictly speaking, if I wrap up carefully and mask myself, I probably could, but I'm still a bit anxious about who I might meet. Yeah. So walking the dog will be the first luxury item.
So Dr. Claire Garada there with one person's experience of getting through to the other side of COVID-19. We're joined by Michelle Roberts now, our health correspondent, for more on what the experience might look like for other people, because I suppose many of our viewers will be either elderly with underlying health conditions themselves, or there'll be viewers who have somebody like that in their life and they'll think, well, that was a good news story, but not all stories are going to end exactly like that. People might need a lot more care.
They might. I mean, we do know, obviously, the groups that you've just said are at higher risk of complications if they catch it. But it's important to say that most people who get this virus will get over it. They will get better. Even if you are in the higher risk categories, you've still got a good chance of recovering from it. Obviously, we've got no immunity, so people have to build up their immunity to this virus.
And I suppose, given that the experience is unpleasant, and the risks are there for certain categories of people, then that does put the question into the arena of what can those groups do to prevent themselves getting it. And this is an area that the government's been, over the weekend, coming under a lot of pressure on. And obviously it's going to come out. We're going to get the press conference later. Are we expecting new advice for those at-risk groups?
So they have been very clear at the moment. There isn't the self-isolation advice for the over 70s, but it's coming. Whether we will get that this afternoon, it's still not clear. But the government have made it very clear now that they want to give daily updates, televised for the public, to give them the best up-to-date information. And down the line at some point, and quite soon, it will be the advice that people who are 70 and above should be staying at home and not getting into contact, physical contact, close contact with other people who might have the virus.
And another line, there's so much confusion of information coming out over the weekend. One of the lines, obviously, late last night was about this Public Health England document that was suggesting that perhaps 80% of the population could be expected. It didn't even sound like they were there anymore talking about a worst case of 80%. They were talking about expected. Can you shed light on that?
It's very difficult to talk numbers. Obviously, everybody wants to know what number will get it, how many people are going to get it. Experts have to model, and they have to look at worst case scenarios so that they can plan the healthcare. Now, the 80% that we're hearing about, that is modelling for a worst case scenario. And all of the measures that are coming in and have been put in place already are to try and make sure that if that is the situation where lots of us will get this infection, that it doesn't all happen at the same time in a massive peak. So that is the point of these measures, such as self-isolation, people who've got the virus at the moment or have symptoms of it, a cough, a high temperature, should be staying at home for 7 days until they feel better and not getting in contact with other people. And that's all about trying to make sure we don't have too many people needing treatment at the same time. I know it's frustrating.
No,
you want
not,
to figure,
but it's helpful to clarify that information has not changed since last Thursday when we saw Sir Patrick Vallance and Chris Whitty and the Prime Minister talking about it. That there is actually no change on that 80%. It's not unexpected. It's a worst case still.
Exactly, and I'm sure later today they will give more information about modelling.
Michelle, thank you. And just a reminder for all latest developments on the outbreak, including what symptoms to look out for, how to reduce your risk, do visit the website bbc.co.uk/news, or do go to the news app on your devices. Now, let's just, before the top of the hour, look at one non-virus story, because around 100,000 under 25s are currently homeless in the UK, and there are 9 charities banding together in a bid to help. The BBC's Anna Crossley has been following the story of one young woman from Bradford who's been trying to find a home for herself and her son.
3 years ago, Julia had a job, a nice house and a promising future. Now she's homeless and living out of carrier bags. She's 24.
I had a good life, I had stuff to look forward to. I had money saved and stuff, do you know what I mean? And now I've nothing.
Julia and her 3-year-old son fled their home last year to escape a violent partner. Since then, her parents have been looking after her little boy, but there's not enough room for her. So she's living in a hostel while she looks for somewhere to live.
I never find out. And not only that, like, if I ever got out to go for a job interview or we don't have an iron here, I live out of a bag and my clothes are creased all the time. It's awful, it's horrible.
It's estimated that 100,000 16 to 25-year-olds have nowhere to live. Many end up homeless because of a breakdown in family relationships. Others may have just left care.
Do you accept DSS on the property?
Ruth Core has been trying to find Julia somewhere to live for the past few months. But it isn't easy when the prospective tenant is homeless, jobless and young.
I think young people have got a double issue because they find it hard to find property because of the stereotypes. So they're already in that situation where it's difficult for them to find a property. Hi, it's Ruth from Centrepoint. Yes, I've seen a property on Rightmove.
9 UK charities have now joined forces to form End Youth Homelessness, a nationwide movement aimed at helping young people with things like rent deposits and furniture.
So this one's got a nice back garden as well with decking, but I prefer that other one.
After months of looking, Julia has now been offered a choice of 2 properties and is due to move into one of them in the next few weeks. Anna Crossley, BBC News, Bradford.
Now, just before we leave and go to the weather, let's just catch up with a couple of lines that have emerged over the course of the past hour while we've been on air. The Labour MP Kate Osborne, who is a Jarrow MP, has tested positive for coronavirus and is to self-isolate. The markets are very sharply down again. The FTSE down, getting on for 8% this morning, and European bourses showing the same damage, despite the efforts of the central banks around the world to coordinate action to prop up the global economy. France, they're talking about a sharply deteriorating situation. Lots more during Victoria's programme. Right now, though, let's look at the weather. Here's Simon.
Hi there, good morning. It's been a rather chilly start to the day. Now, there is some rain in the forecast throughout this week, but high pressure moving its way in from the south initially. That's going to quieten things down somewhat, particularly for England and Wales at first. But it's towards the north and west where we've got this area around. That's moving its way into western Scotland, into the west of Northern Ireland today. The breeze picks up here. Elsewhere, there may well be a bit of cloud around this morning, but some decent sunny spells by this afternoon. Staying dry for England and Wales with temperatures about 11 to 13 degrees. about 8 to 10 Celsius for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Now through tonight, this area of rain will move its way a bit further south, but it'll break up a little bit into northern England, Wales, the Midlands, showers feeding behind that across northern and western Scotland. Overnight temperatures down to about 4 to 7 degrees, so a largely frost-free night into Tuesday. Now during Tuesday, quite cloudy again for England and Wales, but still on the warm side. Further north again, more rain spread into Scotland and Northern Ireland.
Victoria Derbyshire programme up next, and at 11, BBC Newsroom Live will be bringing you all the day's top stories.
I'm here at this hospital where they're already experiencing the benefits of AI.
A new tool to reboot democracy and find common ground amongst the most polarised of views.
This is a very innovative project to protect the environment.
The Take on Tech. Click. Saturday and Sunday at 12:30 on the BBC News Channel.